Welcome to the Church of God Network podcast, everybody. I am here once again with Richard Fowler, who at this point might, with this episode, have the record for most times on the program, which is an esteemed record. Richard, I think that's your third time.
The only record I've got.
Yeah. But we're bringing him on. You might know him from the International Center for World Peace, which is a nonprofit out of the UK. He's also a local contact for Church of God Network in the UK. And you might have seen that he is also a recent grantee from the Ephesians 4 project, which helps fund events that are open to different groups in the Church of God. And he's here to talk about that today, sort of the context behind the event, how the event went, some of the deeper things going on in his area of the world in the Church of God. But how you doing, Richard?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It's great to be on, Dan, as ever. I enjoy our conversations on and off the camera.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great to be here. And I had a hello to everybody who's listening and tuning in today.
So, and I told him I'd do this. And as someone who puts some effort into his background, I've got to ask some questions about yours. So obviously you have your certificates and everything, which I happen to as well, coincidentally. But you have two things in the top corners that I need to get an explanation for. I guess first, there looks to be a painting of the Ambassador campus. What's the story behind that?
So this is the auditorium from Pasadena campus, and there is a story behind it. It's actually a pastel drawing of it. I had a very good friend who actually is still at my workplace, where I work in a school, and she asked, "What's my favorite picture?" And I'd never been asked that before. And there was one picture that had always kind of stuck out to me when I went through the envoys, which was a kind of favorite thing for me to do when I was growing up on Friday evenings with my dad, is just to crack an envoy and just look at these kind of healthy, wholesome young men and young women at God's college, recapturing true values.
Many of whom that you know, but like seeing them at 18 and 19 years old. I remember seeing Jonathan's picture at like 19 and taking a photo and sending it to him.
100%, and a lot of them had hair, and now they.
So, he never did.
Yeah, there was one picture that always stood out. I think it's in the 1986 envoy, which was the envoy dedicated to the life and the work of Herbert W. Armstrong, the founder of the Worldwide Church of God. And in one of those pictures is this beautiful photo of the auditorium where there's sunset and there's this kind of purpley blue hue in the atmosphere, and it's kind of like, because the sun's just set, the kind of glass is lit up almost gold like. It's a beautiful picture, and I kind of thought about it and I thought, yeah, that's actually probably my favorite picture. And so I took a picture, I sent it to this person, and they gave it to me for a birthday present, and they added two of my favorite quotes, one at the top, which is the word of God is the foundation of knowledge. And then at the bottom, it says, we are born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. So that was a real treat. That was a nice birthday present. And so I have it up here on display.
Richard and I are also both obsessed with like Church of God historical artifacts and swag. So anytime we can get access to something like that, we jump on it. Like him, I don't know about what he does, but I know I scour like eBay periodically to see if there's any odd thing from the Church of God history that's out there, and maybe even some recent history from the newer groups. Everyone has the booklets, which of course we have, and they a lot of access to them online. But there's some odder stuff out there that I love to see and get my hands on if I can.
I was jealous of your last purchase. I think it was a wooden stool made in Ghana. Mr. Armstrong, carved out like the logo, and I saw that in the GCI headquarters one time, and it was a great purchase. So yeah, you definitely trumped me on that one.
Oddly comfortable. Like even my friends who are not in the church, you think it's like the most uncomfortable thing because it's a wooden stool, but you sit on like, oh no, this is actually pretty great. But
yeah, it's my new study stool.
Yeah. What's the star trophy?
Yeah, from the sacred to the secular. So that was a trophy I got. It's a plastic trophy, so no gold. And I work in a school. I'm a teacher and a head of year at a secondary school, mainstream secondary school in the UK. And we have a Strictly Come Dancing competition. I believe you call it Dancing with the Stars. And so they got teachers to pair up and dance. And the first time there was a competition, I did a salsa hip hop mashup with a dance teacher, and we got first prize, and that was what we got for it, a little trophy and a bunch of flowers. So I was chuffed, and it's one of my more prized possessions because if anybody likes me, knows me rather, I do like to dance. So
Now, well,
yeah.
when you came to Winter Family Weekend a couple years ago, you almost won Limbo, right?
No, I almost won Limbo, but then there was a dance competition and I won that too. But I was dancing against teenagers. I felt really bad that I took the crown from one of those.
Well, like
But yeah,
a freestyle one. I know, like
yeah,
Tim and Chantel, funny enough, who are now married, weren't even dating at the time.
I know.
Got like second in the
But
like
that was
formal
the
dancing
paired,
thing. Yeah, paired. Yeah.
right? That was the paired. But then there was like a kind of freestyle. Anybody could get up, and I was encouraged to get up by you guys, and I felt a little bit awkward, but I got down to just the last few, and I just realized I was with children on the dance floor, and I was like, "This is, I got to go for it." So I won that too. It's ridiculous.
That's amazing. Okay, that's about as good as an intro as we can get. So, for context, you all had an event in the UK that's open to multiple groups, and it does seem like the UK in your area is becoming a bit of a hub for cross group fellowship, which is cool and sort of, I don't want to say unforeseen, but sort of a little bit out of left field, to use a American idiom. But there's also a very particular set of circumstances in your area currently, and some background that's needed before we start talking about the specifics of the event, because it's not really your typical cross group event. There's a deeper layer to it. So could you talk a little bit about, and I think we might have discussed it on previous episodes where you've been on, but you and I have also come out of a similar community of people in the Church of God that stayed in the Worldwide Church of God a lot longer than most, even when it became Grace Communion International. And that's sort of the backdrop to what's going on currently. Could you speak a little bit about the context before we get started?
Sure. And before I do, I just want to thank CGN, the Ephesians 4 project, for giving us the grant. And I'm looking forward to sharing what the details of that event. But it was a blessing to everybody who attended. But a little bit of context to the event and how we got to promote an event like this. So, yeah, like yourself, of course, we were late to the party. We hung on in GCI. You, I think, jumped about 20 years ago. But we in the UK, there was a number of congregations still meeting on Saturday in the UK in GCI. And then we got new leadership from 𝐜𝐫𝐨𝐬𝐬-𝐟𝐞𝐥𝐥𝐨 to Greg Williams. And he made an edict that eventually the Saturday keeping congregations around the world would have to move to Sunday and have to keep a Western liturgy, so no Holy Day facilitated services. And the deadline for the UK was the end of 2024. So all congregations, of which there must have been upwards of 20, were still meeting on Saturday. And in amongst those congregations were a broad group of people, many who were very comfortable with GCI theology, many who held to old traditional beliefs from the old Worldwide Church of God days, and a few in between. And so for different reasons, they remained. They didn't join another split-off group. And so when it came to this edict that actually you won't be able to go to church on Saturday and keep the Sabbath as we would like to, kind of gathering with God's people, a commanded assembly, then that threw up a big question for many people. And so as 2024 started to, for us, it was 2023, as 2023 in the Watford area, which is the area I'm from, just outside of London, West London. As we got closer to the jump from Saturday to Sunday, a lot of us started to ask ourselves, what are we going to do? Do we just shut up shop, stay at home? Do we join another group? What do we do? And of course, that was a very personal question, a very personal journey for everybody. But myself and these kind of, I would say 8 to 12 people in that Watford congregation that, still wanted to meet on Saturday. We got our heads together and said, well, look, we don't want to stay at home. For different reasons, there wasn't appetite to join another group. I mean, I guess if we wanted to join another group, we would have many decades before. And for me personally, I asked myself the question, what is my responsibility here? I'm a young man. This is my family. This is who I've grown up with. Do I just jump ship and just go and, meet with someone else that I don't really know down the road? Do I just stay at home and do studies? There were elderly people, there were widows, and I sensed, and I think other people sensed that no, we have to stand in the breach. We have to do something, not nothing, and we have to maintain connection and relationships because we're family after all, and we spent so many years together, in this congregation. And so in October, which was the last Saturday Sabbath, before they jumped to Sunday, we decided to meet round people's houses. Now, a fun fact, actually, because it was a chaotic time for many reasons, but we had just come back from the feast in Jerusalem where the 7th of October attacks had happened. Literally the next week was our first meeting on Saturday Sabbath by ourselves. So it was going from a geopolitical chaos to kind of, I guess, church chaos, and trying to make sense of it and knit back our story. And so we continued to meet in houses for a couple of months. There were people who had a big enough house to have, a dozen people or less around. We had a little Bible study, but for 1 week of the month, we didn't have a house. And so to fellowship round. So instead of, we could have just stayed at home, but instead we discussed, why don't we just hire a room in a hall we know somewhere? And Allen Hall, which if you've heard of The Social, that's the kind of title of the place we meet. We had connected with that place previously for a Passover. But equally, years and years, like decades ago, I remember being at Allen Hall as a little kid. So we had history with this place. And so we got in touch with them. We hired the smallest room and we asked Mr. Bergin to speak. Many of you will know Mr. Bergin. He's a very well-known elder in the UK. Served in the Worldwide Church of God administration for many decades.
Yeah, very well respected. He actually continues to get name dropped in messages from some higher ups in different groups. I remember being at the feast for 1 year, and one of the people who were like on the council for that group dropped his name, and I went up after him like, yeah, Mr. Bergen's a friend, and got all excited because they go back quite a while, and he's well respected.
Exactly. And I think that respect, that currency actually gave the impetus for on that first meeting. There was 26 people who just turned up. We thought it was going to be like the 10 of us. 26 people came. And remember, this is in the context of other congregations not having Saturday facilitated services in the UK and people not necessarily knowing what to do, where to go. And so there was this appetite to hear this kind of pillar of wisdom that has been part of our life and our spiritual development for so many years. And we realized there's something of value here. And so we the next month, because we were meeting on the first Saturday of the month, we hired a bigger room, 40 people came. The next month we had to hire a bigger room, then 50 people came. And now every month, the first Saturday of the month, it's around about, we average 70 people who attend. And of course, the other 3 weeks we've continued to meet around people's houses, have house church. And so this has been our response to the fragmentation and the collapse of corporate structure for us. And instead of doing nothing, we've done something. We've kept people together. And I think it's become, like you use the word hub, I think Allen Hall has emerged as a hub for those in the UK that remained in GCI, but now don't have a Saturday facilitated service. And it's become a center of meeting to keep people in connection, to hear God's word preached. And people both come to that, but also some have decided to join as and when they can other groups, Church of God groups like United. So people are making personal decisions, but at least for the people who are coming out of GCI who had nothing and were facing the abyss, and a time of difficulty and being disenfranchised, at least it's provided stability, spiritual pattern and connection for them to maintain the relationships that they've had for decades. So it's helped keep us together as family.
And that's, a couple things for context as well is that on that week when folks get together, it's like one of, if not the biggest congregations in the area for any of the Church of God groups. So it's not like there's some elements to this, which yes, is providing a service for the people who just are now confronting for the first time, what do we do absent what we've been doing for several decades? But it's a unifying space across the different groups, which do have a bit of a smaller presence in Europe as a whole than they do in America. So there are a number of functions, and I think you and I were talking during the planning meeting about how there was an element of being intentional about this, where hey, we're about to go quote unquote on our own, and so 3 times during the month we're meeting in homes, but let's do this once a week thing to establish connection to the greater Church of God, to prevent ourselves from getting into these ruts or habits that, oh, well, we're, like so many of us have been in over the years, where, oh, well, we're the only ones doing the correct thing, something like that. And it's also establishing these bridges with brethren from other groups. So I'm sure you said that many of whom folks have known going back years and years, and those connections are really important to ground us to the fact that we're part of something larger. It's not just the few people in our inner circle.
Exactly, and you hit on a point, and I think this is pertinent to anybody listening today, or anybody, whether you're in a group or unaffiliated group. This was a we didn't plan this. This was a fresh expression, a kind of an attempt to create order out of what it was a chaotic situation, a fragmenting kind of a disturbing situation. But because we said, hey, we're going to keep meeting, because we didn't seek to create an organization, or we're unaffiliated, unincorporated. It was this first expression that people could then hear about and say, okay, yeah, I know that person who goes there. These are people from now, not necessarily fellowship within GCI circles, but maybe other groups, and they've come and visited and checked it out. And I think this kind of fresh expression of what this has been unintentionally, just an organic development, has meant that people feel comfortable in connecting, and not just, as I said, people who have come out of GCI, but people who have for a long time been part of other groups. There's no seeking of membership. In fact, you can't join anything. There's nothing to join. You come, you fellowship, you worship God in spirit and truth, you keep your Sabbath day, and so it's provided a neutral space, but a safe space, a space that is open to all, and one which is I think lowers barriers of entry and is not threatening. And so it would be, if we're talking about numbers, and of course it's not about numbers, it would be, I would imagine, certainly in the UK, it's the biggest gathering. I would imagine it's the biggest gathering on a particular Sabbath. For a Saturday service in Europe.
It's only relevant because I know it's a reasonable thing to bring up, but there are folks who are saying, well, if there's more people somewhere else, why not join where there's more people for the sake of more community, more people and friends and everything. And while the situations aren't always as simplistic as that, there is some validity to that. But in this case, oddly enough, it represents the biggest gathering of people when it does happen once a month, which is a unique thing. I can't think of too many circumstances where there's this regular cross-group thing that represents the largest cohort of Church of God people in the area.
Yeah, exactly. No, that is true. And although it's not so much advertised as, people come from different groups, it's not so much advertised that, it's almost fallen into where people feel comfortable to connect from wherever. And it is literally, it's open to anybody. It was a space, I guess you could call it a home for people who were a little bit lost and wandering, who didn't have that Saturday facilitated service. And so people have enjoyed it. They find it comfortable, and it happens once a month. And it was that meeting that sprung forth the social idea. There's a little bit of lead up to why we had a social, but this was the location, and we realized that it was working once a month, and we thought, well, hey, why not put a social on and invite a wider group of people?
Yeah. And so the social, is, I didn't realize this until you told me during the planning meeting, but this social, which was a Sabbath service and then dinner dance,
right.
You all had like 180 people, which that's a good number for any place currently in the Church of God. But that actually, there were 20 to 30 people that couldn't show because of weather, and that was kind of a blessing because it might have put you over the limit. Like, again, that's not a common occurrence for event planning. Yes. Normally you get like the people who RSVP, and then you figure 60 to 70% will actually show. But for you guys, like the weather was a blessing.
Right. We were glad that some people couldn't come because, we were maxing out. And so, I had about 188 on my list who had kind of got in touch for this social. We hired the hall next to the actual manor house that we meet in. We have the biggest room in that manor house, but next to it is a hall, which is built on the same grounds as where I used to go to church when I was a 5-year-old boy, and back in the day, old worldwide days. So it had, as I said, heritage when it came to the Worldwide Church of God. But yeah, we decided to have that big hall, hire it out. We knew we could invite all of the independent and affiliated congregations who, as I said, who had been disenfranchised by GCI, and all of those, if they came, it would be over 100. And then the idea, and maybe we can get into how the idea birthed and evolved, but we decided, yeah, well, we have this space. People are connecting from different groups on our monthly meetings. Why don't we just have a social and invite as many of the Church of God as we can and make it a real event? And then we realized that cost was increased, and that's when we decided, okay, we need to cover some costs, and we reached out to Ephesians 4, and we're just so grateful because it made it financially viable, because the events aren't cheap, so we had to feed 200 people almost, and I actually think we got close to 200 if you take the cumulative amount who came to the Sabbath service, and thereafter the dinner dance, which the dance was a 𝐜𝐫𝐨𝐬𝐬. And if anybody knows what a 𝐜𝐫𝐮 is like, then you can pull people in the Church of God for 𝐜𝐫𝐮s.
I have no idea what that is.
I know. I say that to an American audience, and they don't get it. It's a Scottish dance. It's very simple. You get a caller. The moves are easy, but they're legendary in the UK because we often had them at SEP, summer educational program, summer camp.
Okay, but yeah, good in terms of the Ephesians 4 project too. Like that's the whole reason it exists. I mean, it's if there are events that, again, they're not only expensive to put on, but they're complicated. Like I will widely tell people, because I've been in operations at nonprofits for a while, event planning was like my least favorite thing to do in my career. Like some people love it, and God bless them. We need people like that. But like, if you're someone who has the energy and the desire, and you're willing to like put on the event, the idea that money would be a barrier because you can't afford it, or people have to go into personal savings, which we also want to avoid. Like it's great people are willing to, but if Church of God Network can help defray the cost so that an event goes on that might not have otherwise, or more people can attend, or just people don't have to go into savings, or best case scenario, none of those are issues, but just maybe the church groups involved have to put a little less money in that they could use for other things in the future. That's the whole point of the event. And the reality is, what happens from it is that you get this really great event that's inspiring to people. You get bridges being built. It seemed like everyone loved it. When we posted about it online, there were people who like are in the US and Canada going, oh, if I would have known about that, I would have gone. I'm like, that's the kind of lengths people would go to experience this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I read the comment and I thought that was great. And, I think the next social, it'll be great if you could visit. I know we talked a little bit about that. But yeah, I think we can go bigger and better. It's not all about numbers, but I think it's about connection. And you make that point earlier on the podcast that, the numbers speak to something deeper in the Church of God, that we are a family wider than our denominational boundaries, that we have deep connections going back decades. And this is what I heard. I mean, somebody was over from the US. They were meant to go to the United Church of God Sabbath service, but they heard from somebody in the US about this event and decided to turn up at the event. So we had somebody from the US. Yeah. It was great. But I heard through the event, because like you said, we got nearly 200, and I think 5 groups, I didn't count fully, but I think about 5 groups were represented. People who I had connected with in the last year through the ICFWP activities, people that you've put us in touch with, Dan, as well. And so people came, and what I heard over and over again is, I haven't seen that person for 30 years. And, I went home and I drove home in the snow. I mean, because that's what put off the 20 people. People were going to come from Wales, which was about a 4-hour drive away. And they're like, we can't come. It's forecast for snow. And it worked out as a blessing. But, it was the only weekend, the first weekend we had snow in the UK. So you think, okay, we have an enemy who wants us to be separated. But that said, I reflected on that comment. I was like, why have we not seen each other for 30 years? We live in the same geographical area. We're about an hour away from each other. And the people were saying, well, once kids, and now they've grown up. And my dad, who's been in the church since 1963, he's in his 80s now. He was just a social bee and butterfly, just connecting with people. And it illustrated what I think is an emerging understanding or an emerging awareness that yes, we are in different groups, and there's reasons for that. But there's nothing stopping us to socialize and connect outside and beyond those group boundaries. And actually, when we do, that is not just a good thing, but it's actually a right thing to do. And so, one thing I was really grateful for and really appreciated is a young minister over here in United Church of God, David Elliott. He was invited because I'm friends with him. I've been to the United service in the YMCA when GCI pulled away from Saturday service. The YMCA, which is quite a part of the heritage in the UK since the 1960s, we've been meeting there. They kind of stepped into that, and I think that's great, preserving heritage, just like we preserve the kind of artifacts of the Royal Church of God. They preserve the space. And one thing I really was grateful for is that, he showed leadership and courage by saying to his congregation that, we're gonna go for the whole thing. Now, he didn't have to, and that wasn't the expectation, but that created a context for his congregation to then step in and say, yeah, let's do that as well. And
yeah. And not just for the social, right? But like for the service, this, like, the thing is that
the whole thing.
things, if nothing else, fellowshipping, having a relationship, being in touch with brethren is great. But who knows what comes from that? There are plenty of occasions over the last few years where we've helped sponsor events or heard about events that are Sabbath services, holy day services that are between multiple groups. And that stuff is so meaningful. And like you said, a minister stepping out, and there are several who are involved in what's going on in your area, various levels of pastor, high up in different organizations who are attending this, which I think is a testament not only to how it's been done, which I think is very respectful to leadership, involving leadership in decision making, trying to make folks feel comfortable, but also the respect you all have for each other because you've known each other for so long, the respect people have for Mr. Bergen and what he's contributed to the Church of God over the years. It's a really nice combination of factors that has led to something special, and that's emerging and continuing to sort of you're seeing what might come of it. It's still in its emerging stage.
Right, and the power of possibility with these kind of unique combinations that we didn't intend to start this, but because GCI stepped away, and we have Mr. Bergen, who's very much been a thought leader within the UK. He has a huge amount of respect and a great reputation for being a faithful servant of God, and the thought leadership he provides through messages, and the willingness to just be open to have an event and connect people with people. I think all of those combinations, as you say, then allow for these possibilities. And so for us, when we think about how we move through this space of the Church of God and the family tree, who knows what possibilities there are as we move through the years and the decades and different layers of generations to come together. One factor, just to loop back, that again aided the success of it, or the amount of people who came, I think, from different groups, because there was a substantial amount, possibly a third of them were from different groups of that number, was the fact that prior to that, 2 weeks before that, and then I know you've shouted it out on your Church of God Network platform, is we had, or rather United Church of God had, an open house event, I think probably one of their first, around the world, but if not around the world, in the UK, where 𝐜𝐫𝐸 came over, spoke at the YMCA, and invited all the different Church of God groups and people there. And again, there was 5 groups represented there, and that was 2 weeks before our Allen Hall event. It was unplanned, unscheduled, but it was just like, but the synergy that was created by these two events side by side, I think, created a momentum and accelerated, or at least galvanized people's motivation to connect.
I think,
and it was actually,
and it's sorry to interrupt, but I think because what just hit me was what you're getting is people are thinking because there are new circumstances, or in United, 𝐜𝐫𝐸's coming over, you're having this event, you're getting people to think or wonder what could happen across different groups, and then immediately you have a test case for what it could look like, and it goes well. Like it's like you said, the synergy, the timing is really interesting there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because, the United Church of God event went well, people did come. There was just over 100 people there. And then there was this kind of nice question and answer afterwards, where people could ask questions about things related to United Church of God, but also the wider Church of God community and what Rick Shaby's vision is, when he talked about unity and unity through truth. And we're able to ask questions about what, that looked like from his perspective and what he was willing to do, or United Church of God was willing to do to create greater unity or connection. That was really encouraging and open and vulnerable. And at that Q&A, that's when the David Elliott, who was kind of chairing the Q&A, said, "Hey, this is what we're going to be doing in 2 weeks," as a response to a question of what will the United Church of God do to support this kind of desired unity. And what I sensed, and this is more of a personal thing when I was there, what I sensed, and this is only a personal interpretation, is that I think, and you see this more than we do, and of course we see it a little bit with the work of the ICFWP, but I guess it's become I see it concretely in the work of Alan Hall. But there's this certainly, it's emerging. It may even be more than emerging, but this desire to connect, this readiness to connect, this readiness to see one another as family beyond denominational boundaries, and this desire to connect. And my perception is that it's driven by an existential need. The fact that we are growing, the organizations, that is, and it's certainly independent congregations, if you're independent, are diminishing in numbers and capacity. So that might be material resources, but also human resources and leadership resources. And so we're looking at the next 10 years and saying, well, okay, look at the last 10 years, there's been a little bit of diminishing. Now, if we project ourselves in 10 years' time, what will we look like? The Church of God is going to be very different. Mm-hmm. And so I think this desire, this motivation, in part is driven by the existential, I don't want to necessarily use the word crisis, but I will for the sake of not finding any other word, of what the Church of God corporate structures as well as independent congregations are facing. And therefore this need then this desire to then connect, because in greater connections, it will stave off some of those problems that may be down the line for the Church of God family tree.
Right. And I think also what you're seeing is the people who really want this to happen more, whether they're people like you and I who are new to the game the last few years, or people who have been doing it for a long, or desiring it for a long time, we're starting to be working together to do these things in the right sort of way, like not fighting leadership, not being cynical or negative or combative. I think that's a big thing, because I've seen it go both ways over my lifetime, where you have people who might want more unity and cross-group fellowship, which is a great thing, but they're so jaded, or they think there's leadership is the enemy to this thing, rather than brothers in Christ who want to be involved in this and want the same thing. We just might disagree on, depending on who you're talking to, how to go about it. But if you work together, like you said, the thing I love about this, and so many things that are going on in the Church of God right now, is that it's smashing that stereotype about leadership, about different groups, because every cohort has stereotypes about it. The people who stayed in GCI have stereotypes. United, Living, CAGWA, independent groups, there's stereotypes that follow all these cohorts. There's stereotypes that follow the membership in those groups, the leadership in those groups. But this kind of stuff is smashing all of that. And you're seeing a lot of it. And part of what we want to do at Church of God Network is not only soften the ground for that and to enable certain things to happen, but then also share it when it does, so more people know about it, so you can continue to erode these negative, cynical views about these things. Because David, and there are some people who, we won't even mention, who are involved in what's going on in Alum Hall, who it would shock people. And for someone like David Elliott to say that in a public forum in front of the head of the group he's involved in, and there not be an issue, is, you got to give credit to him and Rick Shaby and United and everyone who's there, all the brethren who are there, because brethren could make just as much of a stink about this kind of stuff as anybody else. And so all this kind of stuff is extremely laudable and very encouraging. And I love when you mentioned the whole the love and passion around I haven't seen this person in 30 years. And that's the thing. I think
Yeah.
that's at the core of this, is that these they're rooted in love. They're rooted in missing
Mm.
brethren and love for family and a desire to reconnect and the sort of catharsis and maybe sometimes nostalgia around this kind of stuff. Because like you said, there's no reason we shouldn't have seen each other in 30 years. We live right down the road from each other, proverbially speaking. And even if you don't, the thing I say all the time when I go on, I tell people is I love leveraging the connections to my parents. Now, my dads are largely regional in New York and New England and everything, but my mom went to AC, so I love going places on CGN trips. And when I get wind that this person might have been at AC the same time, like I went to 𝐜𝐫𝐨𝐬𝐬-𝐷𝐸𝐻 headquarters, and the guy who was leading songs that day, really nice guy. I was talking with him, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't really know anyone in New York, just a couple of people I went to AC with." And I said, "How about this person?" And said my mom's maiden name. He's like, "Yeah, I'm her son." And he just like flipped out, like the emotion around old friends in the church, people that you cared about, people you haven't seen in a long time. And then she accompanied me to Winter Family Weekend this year, and they got to see each other. And it's like those things are so valuable, that people starting to share that again. Those are hard formations to break again. Like especially when we're so starved for it. If it's 1985, maybe we would think, okay, we got a lot of people locally, we don't feel starved for that. But now people have been starved for it, and now seeing not only a friendly
Yeah.
face, but someone who didn't go with the changes, someone who didn't leave the church completely, and someone who is returning the love you're showing to them in the same way. Those are powerful things.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so, I mean, we everybody knows this instinctively, but also experientially. Relationships transcend so much. Love transcends so much. I mean, Christ himself, people will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. It's that relationship and love that will transcend the denominational boundary that we have, or at least the proclivity to keep people within those silos for the sake of loyalty or for whatever. And then I'm not throwing stones at that. We all need structures. We all need a community.
Well, our own issues too. I mean, you and I come from a group that like no leadership told us to do that. We had our own negative stereotypes and things that I look back on and were unreasonable, and no one influenced me to do that. I just had to learn with God's help and over time that I was off base. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point a bit further back, where it's like when you get these possibilities, these events, these situations where people do come together, it's those experiences and sometimes just creating that context for that first experience that I think creates an exit velocity in people's minds to get out of the stereotype and say, you know what, no, this is good. I want to do this again. So these ideas or these events that we put on, or whatever the other events the Ephesians 4 projects have inspired or facilitated, create experiences for people to have that taste and then say, you know what, I want to do this again. And if more and more people in the Church of God have that experience, I think there will be a kind of a movement, maybe it's too strong a word, but certainly a higher frequency of these events, or a more willingness to do it that will start to permeate not just the 15% for people who go first, the people that lead an idea, but actually then the behind that, the masses. And if you then can trickle out, then it will become a regular thing. And no one's asking anybody to leave any churches, but just to that, an example.
It's a value add. It's a value add. There's no subtraction from anyone's current state right now.
100% value added. People are saying when they're leaving, is like, oh, when's the next one? And we hadn't even started thinking it, but now I emailed Mr. Bergen this weekend. I've shared a tentative date with him. It's going to be in the summer. So hot off the press, if you're listening to this and you got some dollars to burn, you want to see the Green Isles of Britain, Great Britain, then we're doing another one in the summer. It won't be a dance afterwards, but it'll be something like a quiz, maybe, we'll take use of the outdoor space as well. There's a bit of grass there. So we're going to put it on again. And this is the thing. People have had that experience. It's like, boom, yeah, this is good. Okay, then that creates possibility. And we were talking about it in the planning meeting. Sometimes it just takes doing something. And then when someone does it and everybody sees it and then they experience it and they embody it, then it becomes real in their minds. It becomes real. It becomes reality. And sometimes it's not that people are against fellowshipping with other people. They just need a chance to do it or an experience. And then they know it's real and it's possible. And when it comes to the next one, it's like, yeah, of course, I'm there. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to bring something else to the party. You know, we had one person who just reached out to me, a part of one of the Church of Gods. And one thing because I was juggling lots of things, I'm not a typical event planner, by the way. And if I may say, and it's appropriate to say, there was a wonderful team helping out. And I just want to give a shout out to them. They'll know who they are. People part of the Allen Hall, congregation and group there who, just did a phenomenal job in serving people, in getting drinks and food ready and looking after the sound. And of course, Mr. Bergen gave the sermon. So there was a whole team behind it. So it's not my natural wheelhouse to plan an event. But one thing I was thinking is that, I'd love to get pictures taken. I'd love to, capture this. But in the million things you have to do, it was just low on my priority list. What happened? Someone reached out to me. By the way, I take pictures in this Church of God when we have events. Do you mind me doing that? I was like, thank you. I would love you to do it. And he came with his professional camera. He took pictures. He uploaded it onto a secure site, and I've emailed that link out to everybody who came along. And I just thought, yeah, people working together, how it can magnify and amplify the experience. And I'll just share this short and small anecdote because I brought it up in a sermon when I was preaching in Westchester, of the synergy created when you work together. Because if you've ever come across the Belgium horses, they're huge horses. They're world known for pulling huge and heavy weights. In fact, I think in the US there's competitions. I've seen videos on YouTube of them.
It sounds like something we do.
Weights. Yeah, and it looks like an American audience or American activity, but I didn't look into it too much. But one of those horses can pull 4,000 pounds. And you think, well, if they put two horses together, they'd double it. They'd pull 8,000 pounds, but they don't. Two horses together pull 16,000 pounds worth of weight. And there's something even more because that's not their limit. If you get two horses together, that's not the limit they can pull. If you then train them together, if they live together, feed together, and grow together, they can actually end up pulling, it can hit sometimes 32,000 pounds, two together. So there's a truth in that. Not only does the collective work of God's people coming together, produce something, it produced greater than the sum of its parts, number one. And number two is just think, if we do these events and have these Vision 4 events and have these cross-group events more and more, as we work together, as we spend time together, as we get to know each other afresh, as we start to see what skill and talent out there and what love and service is there, what will actually be the net effect of that? Well, it won't be. It will be even greater than what we have now. So I think we're living in an exciting. We're always living in an exciting time. But for the Church of God, in facing the next 10 years, I think next decade is pregnant with all kinds of possibility. And I do not think, and I've shared this before, I do not think Church of God Network, the ICFWP, and whoever's out there trying to promote cross-group, cross-denominational connection, fellowship, teaching, I do not think it's an accident that these initiatives have come at this time. The times call forth the speakers, the time calls forth the initiatives, and I think there's more to mine, and I think people are. I don't want to say waking up because that sounds patronizing, but people are becoming increasingly aware of this and desiring this.
Well, it depends on what's needed, right? Because like I think I needed to wake up, but for other people, maybe they haven't needed to wake up in terms of realize it's needed, but maybe they needed cynicism removed, or maybe they needed to see it was possible. Right. The thing you mentioned about showing that something is possible is huge. Sometimes it's because of negative experiences. You think it's not, but sometimes you just don't think about it. It's a weird comparison, but like I'm a big music fan. I've come to really like Randy Newman over the last bunch of years. Most people only know him for like the Toy Story theme and stuff, but he's a great songwriter. I remember when I first started listening to him and hearing how he would write songs lyrically and just going, you can do that? Like, that's not a rule that you like. I've never heard someone do that, and just realizing that's one possible avenue. If you were a songwriter, you can write like that. Someone who's breaking the unwritten rules. It's the same thing in any walk of life. And for this, it's, I didn't know it was possible. oh, I didn't know it was
Mm.
possible to work with that group or to do that kind of thing. And what you're seeing now is not only is
Right.
it possible, but you're seeing your Belgian horse example take uh, show its effect too, because you have what's going on with the UK, which is in its infancy, I guess, so to speak. But you have things happening all across the world. You have groups in Atlanta now through having contact with Church of God Network, being put in touch with one another, having events locally. Now
Right.
all of a sudden there's 4 or 5 groups there that work together all the time, who are doing
Mm.
charitable work together, who are putting on events and growing from that. And then the response to the California wildfires that just happened
Right.
is an example of this, where, Church of God Network was able to raise over $125,000 for the response to that, with while partnering with a working group of leaders from 4 or 5 different organizations, getting donations from 4 or 5 other ones in addition to that. None of us as individual groups would have been able to raise that much. None of us would have been able to identify needs on our own that much. It's a testament to networking, to sharing relationships, to doing something from an attitude of outward concern and give. And the not only is the uh, is the impact greater than the sum of its parts, but like it's exponential. Not
Right.
it's an exponent to whatever the initial value is that can be achieved. And not only that, you're seeing once people see this is possible, then it's like, okay, then all of a sudden a million other possibilities open up. Well, why,
Mm.
this, we should do this more. We should do this semi permanently. We should have more events like this. What else can we do together? It kind of be, it might be great. I'm just thinking as we're talking to have maybe I don't know how logistically easy it would be, but like a podcast with 4 or 5 different people where we bring on one from each of these different hubs in the church and talk about all the different things that have been going on in one podcast. Because there's been so many. CGN's only existed for 5 years, and the amount of things we've seen occur has been incredibly encouraging. And there's more to come. There's more in the works. So I think, and for every person, you get to change their outlook on all this, and then they
Right.
affect a person. It's exponential in a literal sense.
Yeah, and then you're also pulling from people's experiences and their wisdom in doing things like this. So you just add to this pool of ideas and creativity and
Yeah.
initiative. And I think that can spread out, sprinkle out, and that can start to affect culture. And yeah, I'm speaking about the things that I know not of and the divine things, but then maybe that pushes the collective Church of God family tree, which is a term I tend to use of all these different Church of God groups, independent and corporate, pushes them into a place and a space spiritually where God would want. And I have no angle, I have no agenda. I don't know what that looks like in the future, but I know more connection, more love, more family is only a good thing, and maybe actually it's a right thing. And again, God is the shepherd of his sheep, and he is, Christ is the head of the collective body of believers, wherever you are. And so who knows what's in his thinking, but certainly what we've had in our last 3 decades and that fragmentation, so many things that are not good about that, but we see a kind of reversal in these activities and what you're expressing, and a reversal I'm not talking about in a corporate nature, but in attitude, like you said about smashing stereotypes, and maybe having the judgments there that even might be micro judgments, but just might stop you from reaching out, connecting, or doing something which actually is totally cool, but you're just being held back from it. Those are moving, I think, in the right direction. So it presents itself as an exciting season, and the God's Spirit is at work, in all of us and His collective body, and as we get closer to the return of Christ, whenever that might be, we're of course one day closer than we were yesterday. So whenever it will be, it will be. But that might push the Church of God collective body of believers into a spiritual state that can be more equivalated with what Revelation says about the church has made herself ready.
Yeah. And that's it. Not only that, which I completely agree with. I think the church needs to make herself ready. Judgment starts with the house of God. but you all and then we talk about the obvious, the perceived need for more cross group fellowship, the all the other secondary and tertiary needs that are affected by positively by more of that. But you also have the dynamic of young people, which is now a term I use very broadly, considering that you and I are fastly aging
really
out.
broadly.
Yeah,
That definition's range gets wider and wider with each passing year.
I know, but like where there's folks our age and younger, maybe is a good way to put it, who have an energy and desire to do something, to like not be on the sidelines, proverbially speaking, but to be engaged in something of meaning with the most important community in our lives. And it's like, put us to work. Like, we want to do something. Some of us might get ideas and then start something, like with Church of God Network or International Center for World Peace. Some people just want to be involved in something. And also, we don't have, like, whether it's people in a different group who some of us may or may not be related to through marriage or just have family members, whether it's leaders or lay members, some were people who, my dad's a minister. We've had ministers in our lives who have been incredibly influential, helped us through difficult times. That's, a universal experience, that there's an attitude now of young people wanting to do more, to be involved, to be put to work in service, just wanting to give, right? Like, I want to help out. There's no ulterior motive here. And I think people are starting to realize that's the motivation, and that there's a softening effect to that too. When the attitude is outward, like, hey, we'll put on the site or we'll put on the event. You just have to show up, like, and then you start getting this cascading effect for service too. We're like, okay, well, I'm a photographer. I'm willing to do that. Can I get involved? Like, and that's another one of those secondary issues, the issue of giving people outlets for service that are maybe outside the norm of what we've been used to the last couple decades.
And it's so important to engender a responsibility and to the next generation, and to bring them to where they should be, which is in an attitude of service and helping God's people. But I want to go back to a point, because I want to extend it, because I think it's a very important point. You talked about motivation, that people are seeing that the motivation is to serve and is to love and to help and to heal and to repair or whatever that and whatever that looks like. Because historically, as in our culture, motivation, especially with all the spirits we've gone through, is a huge thing in people's minds when they're thinking about going to something, doing something. I mean, I even got a phone call about the social, and they asked you, "What are you planning? What are you doing here?" And the question came from a place of, "What is your motivation? What's your end game?" And the answer was, like, we just wanted to hold an event to connect all the affiliated Church of Gods, bring them together, and then we saw the capacity to connect to invite other Church of Gods in for a chance for people to connect and be in relationship. That was the only motivation. And the reality is, we're not a corporate entity, so there's no membership. But I understood the question, because that has predominated the psyche of our Church of God. And here's the deal. Here's why it's shifting, because you mentioned, like, people are realizing and waking up, this next generation, their motivation is good. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've preached on it twice and mentioned it in Westchester. Trust is time honored. Motivation is only born in its true reality over a span of time. It takes time. And if you're a person who's stuck around in the Church of God since 95, you've weathered the storms, you've turned up to your congregation, that's your motivation manifest. Like in Galatians 6, it says, he who sows to the flesh will reap corruption, but he who sows to the spirit will reap everlasting life. Don't be mocked. God is not deceived. It says, look, your motivations will bear fruit. If you're doing it just for the fleshly reasons, for your own self-promotion or another carnal motivation, it will manifest itself. But if you're actually doing it for the Spirit, that is for love and service, for the good of God's people, given enough time, that will manifest. And people will see clearly. And I think we are in a stage where we've gone so long in the Church of God, whether you're in a corporate structure or an independent congregation, where if you have stuck around, then your heart is probably most certainly right. There could be a whole host of other things I could have done with my life apart from stick around. But God has called me. God has called you. He's converted us. He's given us His Spirit. He's granted us repentance. We've received the love of the truth, and I believe, in the case of many, yourself, myself included, but God is our judge. We received the love of the brethren, and that time-honored need to be able to see the motivation has elapsed, and therefore there is more trust. And I think that's a really important thing. Yeah, I know you're going to make a point, so make a point, and then I'm going to come back and loop back on a second thing I want to say.
Because the thing there too is that oftentimes people will hear that question, that phone call, and they'll see it through the negative or cynical prism of, why are you questioning this? This is a great thing. Like, why are people so negative? Like, well, no, like it takes time to build trust, especially if someone doesn't know you. Like the idea that whatever International Center for World Peace or Church of God Network should have had the right to people's trust the moment it launched is absurd. Like you need to prove the intentions that you, not only the intentions, but you're like capable of doing what you set out to do, that you that your attitude is in the right place, that you're not crazy, right? I mean, because people have these views for good reason. Like, it's based on experience and plenty of things that have been done for the wrong reasons and have blown up in people's face over the years, or even just because sometimes it's not always that simple of this is done poorly, this is done well. Things that are done well can have major hiccups or mistakes that are made, and how you respond to the mistakes, how you own up to mistakes is part of the trust building process. And so it's this really slow build but once you cross that threshold of trust, then that's when you can see exponential change and growth.
I totally agree. And it's an excellent point. And the reality is that, we also have the same human nature as somebody who has had the wrong motivation. The heart is deceitful above all. So, that is true of mine and your heart, that it is anybody else. So 100%, you cannot despise the cynicism, and you have to make space for it. So if you are planning on doing something and you've got an initiative, and I know we're all on the spectrum of sensitivity in different areas, but you cannot get offended at that. And I speak to anybody who's seeking a negative. Yeah, you cannot. You have to make space for that, because that is a genuine concern. People have been burnt before. The only response to that is to make space for it, understand it, and continue on knowing that if you have the right heart. And by the way, that's the question we should be asking of ourselves. So if someone else asks it, they're doing us a favor. They're holding up a mirror and saying, is your heart right? Because that's what we should be asking. Is our heart right? Now, if it is, you will reap everlasting life. Christ says, if you sow to the Spirit, you'll reap everlasting life. God is not deceived, by the way. He sees it all, by the way. So I do think that is, and I use this in a small p way. If you are running an initiative, you have to pastor that response. I mean that in a small p way. I'm not talking about being a pastor. I'm talking about you have to manage that. And it's important that you do it with patience, love, and concern. And that's what Paul entreats Timothy, to do. You got to be patient. You got to understand. So, and like you say, in time, people will readjust. And I do think, with what I've seen, there was that person who did ask that question. They came after the service and they had a great time, and and I'm sure they'll come again.
And that's more powerful, by the way, in terms of most people don't have this view. I mean, the idea of receiving negative or critical feedback or asking a question that could be perceived that way, it's hard to take from most people, but that person is giving you a gift and an opportunity, because number one, they're being courageous enough to be honest with you about how they think, which is a huge thing and something you absolutely can work with. And then two, they're giving you an opportunity to provide an answer, or if you don't have one, to think about it and show that you are malleable and can and are giving them the time of day. But then if you do provide a sufficient answer, or answer it through the experience that they had, then you've gained an ally and a friend, and you've created a bond that was way stronger than if the person just kept it to themselves.
Yeah, exactly. And it's part of the work that we, and I think in particular, and this is the comment I wanted to go back to, is the generational thing. It's the work that is laid upon and I would say the burden is laid upon our generation, and we have to help heal that and overcome that. And that is a cross that we have to bear, and we shouldn't be too discouraged by it. But at 100%, when you respond in X, Y, and Z way, that is a chance you would have gained someone. But it is a burden that we have to bear. Now, because a while back, just a moment ago, we talked about our generation, people stepping up and serving, and I wanted to come back to that point because I think it's important for two reasons. Number one, I think the reason why you might find if our generation, I'm actually 41 now, so you
and I are part of the same generation, but there's plenty of other adults who aren't. Yeah,
exactly. But what is happening is reason I think we are willing to connect with each other and we have these ideas is we did not go through the trauma our parents went through, or the pain and the difficulty of having these splits. And we come from a different generation that kind of grew up in probably our hubs or our corporate organizations or our independent congregations. And therefore we do, I think, see the barriers slightly differently. And I think because of that, we're not so wedded to, right, we made a decision on doctrinal reasons or governmental reasons or procedural reasons to be in this church. We're there because our parents, I remained in Jesus because of my parents until I was old enough to make my own decisions. But because we haven't necessarily gone through that decision-making process, we've just grown up where we are. And we know of friends who we went to summer camp with when we were in our teens in other organizations. Those barriers aren't so hard and strong. And I think that's why our generation, it's a call to our generation that to connect and to what when I say it's not really use, but to take the opportunities that we have. The fact that we don't have the baggage that maybe the older generation have in regards to groups and why we are where we are, to use that gift that we don't have that baggage to connect, to fellowship. And I'll just make one other small point. In tandem with the older generation.
Yeah.
So the reason why Alum Hall works in a number of ways, yes, it was a response that there was no minister there as such. We informed the ministry that we wanted to keep meeting, and they were having to work out their own decision-making process. I won't go into it now, but they couldn't immediately fellowship with us. They had to make a personal decision whether they were going to give up their ministerial credentials, because that was the requirement placed on them if they were going to fellowship with God's people on Saturday. So there was no minister, but the brethren did this. We took that step. We let the ministry know, and eventually the two ministers, Mr. Emerson and Mr. David Silcox, made a decision, and they were able to fellowship with us. Then in tandem, we've worked with them. And so what you have this fresh expression, maybe this creativity and these ideas driven by our generation, but it's held in orientation and stability by, someone like Mr. Bergen or Mr. Silcox, who can give a sermon when you do have a social, and people will come because there's wisdom, currency with that, and there's wisdom, and he's a pillar. And so I think that part of the work, if I'm going to be specific about the next decade, is hopefully a greater working and a transition between the older generation to the younger.
Yeah, I don't think it could be in isolation. I don't think it can only be one against the other. And because part of it too is there's a reason our generation doesn't have as much of that baggage. Now, obviously, it's different depending on different groups. Some groups have gone through splits more recently, but by and large, and some people might be listening going, well, no, I remember that split. It was very traumatic. But there's also a difference between going through a split at 15 and being an adult going through the split, where you see the stuff going on maybe behind the scenes, or you have experiences with relationships that are broken, trust that is broken, even betrayal. And I know that's a strong word, but we can betray each other. And it doesn't mean that reconciliation isn't possible. But when you've experienced that level of conflict between you and a brother in Christ, or maybe an actual blood brother in some cases, that's real. That's the challenge to overcome. And our generation hasn't experienced that as much. And so I think we need to give we need to be understanding to the generations that have gone through that, to understand what happens in the human psyche and condition when that happens, but also know what Scripture admonishes us to do and be willing to work towards that. Not to think it's easy, not to think some previous generation just got lazy on that front. I mean, I was just in First Corinthians and the scripture where Paul talks about, hey, I'm hearing you all are bringing lawsuits against one another in the worldly courts. Like, you shouldn't be doing that. We know that section of scripture. What he says afterwards is, isn't it better just to be wronged? Isn't it better just to be defrauded? Like, you should just take that on the chin rather than go through all that conflict. And man, if that's not like the hardest thing. Like, we don't emphasize that in any walk of our lives, any generation. So in the only hope we have of addressing these things is working with the different generations, both our elder, but also, I'm in my mid-30s, you're 40. There's now a younger generation of adults who are a completely different generation than us, and we have to include them as well. And only by navigating all this stuff together and realizing, until we've been put in that position, until you and I betray each other and then actually reconcile and have navigated that, we should reserve some judgment.
Right. I totally agree. And it can be hard for different people at different stations. Absolutely. And so people's experience have been very real, and there's a genuine hesitancy with some of these things. But then for those who maybe don't feel the full weight of that, then they might be able to help encourage. And that's why that cross-generational dynamic, it is an important ingredient as we move forward in these events that are cross-group, the Ephesians 4 projects that you will continue to fund, because then you bring everybody with you. And if it's cross-generational, then it has a chance to change perspective, mindset, and culture. And it's the change of culture that can shift things in a really positive way. Whatever, once again, that may look like. I'm not stepping into specifics because I don't know what that fully looks like, but I know division is not good and unity is good.
Yeah, that's a great way to end. Way to give us our final tagline, Richard. Thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate having you on as always and getting the chance to chat. And it's also like, it kind of represents us being able to have a bit of a catch-up conversation ourselves.
100%. And I love the fact that we're able to, in conversation, tease out of one another, ideas that we're grappling with, concepts that are on the cutting edge of our thinking and our creativity. But it's in these discussions that we actually they're able to emerge out of our thinking, and I think that is good for us individually, but it's also good for the collective, body of Christ, is to be able to have these conversations. But because from these conversations, I think a clearer picture of reality emerges and how to move through that reality. So I'm always grateful. Myself from an Allen Hall perspective, but also from an ICFW perspective, really respects and congratulates the work of CGN. And once again, we're just grateful. And I know the team's grateful. Mr. Bergen's grateful for the financial support and making, that social come alive. And all I can say is bring on the next one. We'll advertise it far and wide.
Absolutely, man. Hope I can make it in person.
I hope you can too.
Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Hope to see you next time. Thanks, Richard. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.